Hello, hello, hello. Hi. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here. Let's see if I can put this without spilling tea into the. Oh wait, yeah. Yes. I'm so excited to be here. This is such a treat. Maya and I have known each other for a long time. My name is Justin Hall. I'm a cartoonist and the chair of the MFA in Comics program at California College of the Arts, which is where Maya went to.
I just realized we met 9 years ago.
Oh my
It's
God.
2013.
I haven't changed at all.
Yeah. We're both
think-
exactly the same.
I think I'm more immature. You're more mature, I gotta say. Yeah. Maya, why don't you introduce yourself?
Oh, okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm an author and illustrator. I've actually personally talked to almost everyone who already is in this crowd, so you know. I'm from the California Bay Area. I use the pronouns EMR. I wrote this book, Genderqueer Memoir, which came out about 3 years ago now. It is the story of my life. So also, if you've read it, you know a lot about me. I described it once as wretchedly intimate. And of course, it was the most challenged book in the US of last year. So that is a thing that has really sort of changed the conversation around this book and my experience of being a published author, specifically in the last 12 months. It's been a real roller coaster of highs and lows, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one thing I do want to ask about is that sort of odd, you just mentioned this odd concept where you've made a memoir that is quite intimate and then people feel like they know you and they know some aspect of you, a sort of avatar of you, but they don't necessarily know you. So I mean, this is sort of the memoirist dilemma, right? Like how have you handled that?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I definitely have people who've read the book and it really moved them and they come up and they want to chat with me as if we both know each other the same amount, which is not true. They know a fair amount about me, but not everything because I am 33 years old and this book is only 240 pages. So it's not every single day of my whole life. But usually what I try to do is if someone comes up and wants to have that type of conversation, what I need to do is then ask them, like, well, tell me about yourself. Like, what are your creative projects or your hopes and dreams and goals and fears and pasts and all of that? And I try to, I guess, almost like bridge that intimacy gap level as much as I can, especially if it's like a signing and I only get to talk to people for like 5 minutes a piece or 10 minutes. It's hard, but it means that I think when I meet people, I end up just sitting and doing a lot of listening because I'm like, well, they already know about me or look at some of the major things that I have to talk about. But if someone related to my book, it probably means we have stuff in common and that we might be able to be friends. And so I just want to hear like, well, where are you coming from and what is your story? And then also usually by the end of it, I'm like, have you considered writing a memoir? Because I do think, as we talked about a little bit in the Banned Books panel last night, like I do truly believe every single person in the world has a life interesting enough to warrant a memoir if they're called to write one. And specifically people who have not seen their story as much reflected in the mainstream media.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is when did you do the self-portrait?
I did this self-portrait as part of an assignment at California College of the Arts. This was this is an assignment from Chris Kohler's inking techniques class, where we had to draw portraits of ourselves in 4 different styles, and this is the one that was easiest for me because it was just with, I think I used probably just Sakura Micron, thin nibbed pens, which is what I was working on the big project I did as my MFA thesis at the time. And so I also had to do one in gouache and one in watercolor and a couple of other medias that I was not as familiar with, but that was like, this is my jam. And I was also at the time working on a long-running medieval fantasy webcomic, which I have completely deleted from the internet now. But this was the style of the web.
I have copies, just saying. Yeah.
Want some of few. But this was the style of the webcomic I was working on at the time. So you can also see, this is like about 2012, 2013. This is sort of the style of my art at the time entering grad school. And I think, obviously you can tell, I think that it's me and that I drew it, but you can also tell that I've simplified a lot and I do much less cross-hatching than I used to do.
But also it shows off some of your obsessions, right? The sort of naturalist elements. I love the bird and the nest in the hoodie. The sort of medieval elements
Yeah.
that show up a lot in your work.
Yeah. Or did at that time. I mean, it's an aesthetic I still absolutely love. Trung and I literally got lost on the walk here this morning because we were like looking at this gorgeous sort of Gothic style church, and we were so entranced by the stained glass windows and flying buttresses, et cetera, that we like walked right past the street we were supposed to turn on and walked like 10 minutes in the wrong direction talking about Italian architecture. I'm like, oh shoot, we were supposed to turn on that street. So like I'm still very, very attracted to this like type of art, but it's not the type of art that I really make anymore. And I would like to go back to it, but I don't know when that will be.
Well, I want to get to I mean, I know that you're working on a fictional book as well, so I want to talk about that at some point as well. But to get the sort of elephant out of the room, which you mentioned in the beginning, is of course that this book, Genderqueer, was the most challenged and banned book. 2 years running, I guess?
It was officially the most challenged book in the US of 2021. It will likely be #1 of 2022, but we won't know until early next year. They will count up all of the challenges that have been reported to ALA and like the National Coalition Against Censorship and the American Library Association and PEN America kind of keep track of the ones that are reported. And there are also probably many more challenges that go unreported, but they at least track all the ones that they hear about and are that librarians.
#1, baby.
Yes.
So sort of thinking about the whole journey of that, like this is from a piece that you did for the Washington Post, an op-ed about the experience. So can you walk us through like, so the publication of the book happens and then the book is sold and does what it does in the world and does well. And then it suddenly pops back up.
Yes, I know. It was very strange because when I was first working on the book in 2018, I was part of a really great writing comics like crit group. And one of the people in the group, it was the cartoonist Jimmy Robinson. He's a very sweet guy. He did this series called 5 Weapons, among others. And he read an early draft and he said, this book will be challenged, and take it as a compliment when that happens. Also, maybe get friendly with the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, like right now. And he said that to me in 2018, and I kind of had that in my brain all along. And when it came out in 2019, I did think to myself, I'm not naive. I know that queer and trans content frequently receives pushback on the internet, in public, et cetera. So I did brace myself. I was like, is there going to be like a big negative reaction? And there really wasn't at the time. It was actually received with a ton of love. The first print run, which was around 5,000 copies, sold out the week of release, and then we had already ordered a second printing like the same summer it came out, and like librarians were buying it. And then in 2020, it won 2 awards from the American Library Association. It won an Alex Award and a Stonewall Honor, and it really seemed like it was just receiving this amazingly warm, like loving reception. And then doing like, as well as like a medium level book from a medium level publisher from a debut author did. I was like very happy with its success, but it wasn't like unbelievable success, And then in almost about a year ago, in September of last year, I was tagged in a social media post of a parent ranting about how terrible this book was and how inappropriate and how it was pornography and I'm a pedophile and grooming, and all of these relatively nasty words that get used on the internet because they draw reactions. And this was in a school district in Virginia, the state of Virginia. And I was like, this is a block and delete situation. And I literally was just like, block, delete, went to bed, moved on. And that was like the first domino of a whole series of events that I would never have predicted. And that ban got very highly publicized because there was a governor race going on in the state of Virginia at the time. The governor made book banning and like parents' rights to control what sort of like media is used in the classroom a real talking point of his campaign. Unfortunately, he then didn't win the election. So I think other Republican politicians were like, oh, this is a useful talking point. Oh, like things like immigration and abortion, these touch point topics, we can turn book banning into like one of these things that draws people to vote, to the polls. And I literally kept thinking like, surely this is gonna like blow over, and there's like a ban in Virginia, and then there's a second one another place in Virginia, and then there's one in Florida, and then there's one in Ohio, and then Pennsylvania, and then Rhode Island, and then Alaska, and then I was like, then there were so many I just stopped being able to keep track. But also, I'm so used to things on the internet when they go viral to have a moment and then kind of fade. The next thing, a cute cat falls off a couch or something, and then everyone is forgetting about books or whatever it is. what I think has surprised me most about this is like the staying power of the story of banned books and queer books, and specifically my book being kind of like the poster child of this moment. It's surprising to me how much is still in the media a full year later. And yeah, I keep thinking like, surely the weirdest has happened, and then something else even weirder occurs. But so
the midterm election's coming up too. I mean, it's only getting more.
I know. So we'll see what that brings. But yeah, I think the experience for me, like emotionally, first was like kind of a certain amount of like shock, like, oh my gosh, why is this book is almost 3 years old? Why is this happening now? And then how do I respond to this? And then just an absolute flood of media requests, everyone wanting an interview from like college papers, high school papers, very small regional papers, all the way up to like NPR and like the New York Times, and me being like, oh my God, like I'm getting so many requests that if I responded to all of them, I would accidentally become a full-time public speaker who has no time to write or draw. And that's not what I want. But how do I decide which ones are worth to respond to and which ones I can kind of ignore? And I was very like, for a little while, I felt very like, almost like a panicky, like I have to respond to this. I need to make my voice heard, et cetera, et cetera. And it was also because I thought it was going to blow over more quickly. So I was like, okay, if this is like a thing that's in the media for 2 months, I should do at least like 4 really good interviews in that time or something. And I think now I'm like, oh, this is more of a long haul situation. And now I'm kind of like, and I also got a really good piece of advice from the woman who was the publicity head at ONI at the time, who has moved on to greener pastures, Tara, and she said, let's just only respond to things that have national reach. Mm-hmm. And I was like, thank you, a guideline. This is very helpful. Now I can like have a reason for saying no to like a whole bunch of these things. But when it's NPR, I'll say yes, that kind of thing. So.
You actually, a little bit earlier, told me that you had a hint about how to say no, which is a big,
yes.
It's a real problem for me, at least.
So I got to meet the wonderful author and editor at Scholastic, David Levithan, who was one of my very favorite authors when I was a teenager, because he was one of the first people writing YA books that had happy endings. There were people who wrote queer YA books before him, but like he wrote like Boy Meets Boy, which is this like very sweet story about like a gay boy in like a town that has like almost no homophobia, and like instead of Boy Scouts they have like the Joy Scouts that are like gender neutral, and there's like a drag queen running as both is the star quarterback and also running for like homecoming queen at the same time. It's very like sweet and joyful. He wrote this book in like 2003, which is the year that I was in 8th grade. And that was very impactful for me to like read that. Anyway, I got to have breakfast with him at ALA over the summer. And I expressed to him this feeling of like, I'm getting so many requests and I don't know what to say yes to and what to say no to. And he said, think of it this way. If you get an invite to like an event or an interview, and if it was tomorrow, would you want to do it if it's tomorrow? Would it be exciting? And if the answer is yes, you should do it. But if you wouldn't want to do it if it's tomorrow, say no. Because I was like saying yes to things that were like 4 months out, because I was like, yeah, I could do that in January of next year, sure. And then January of next year rolls around and you're like, oh God, my life is very full. But he was like, yeah, if you would want to do it if it's tomorrow, say yes. And I was like, oh.
That's great advice.
It's really good, because he also faced a lot of book bans and challenges in his career. So he's kind of been through this same cycle of like requests and like speaking engagements and like what do you and do not respond to. And that was super helpful.
I wanted to also, you touched on this a bit last night, but like all 3 of the guests did, but there's this sort of, it must be sort of a mind, that your book is going to get so much more attention and sales from the banning, which is also then hurting a lot of the people that you most wanted to read the book. And it's also the sort of horrendous sort of attack on oneself and as a creator. So how are you squaring that sort of mental conundrum and emotional conundrum of like, on the one hand, it gives you a larger platform actually, and more people are going to read this book, but also it's an attack.
Yeah, it is hard because it has given me a platform that I never had before, and it has given me opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise. it has also like kept me up at night and like wasted a ton of my time. So there's real pros and cons to that. And then I think I'm pretty good at not taking it as a personal attack on like an emotional level. I'm just really good at compartmentalizing. And then B, so many of the people who challenged the book have said literally in quotes to the media, I haven't read it, but I think it's inappropriate. And so that was like, okay, this is not a judgment of my work because they haven't even read my work. I think it's being challenged. I think it's just sort of like this book was it's like that right place, wrong time sort of situation where I think my book got dubbed the poster child of this moment for like, there's sort of three reasons that I see. One is that it's a comic. We talked about last night that I think when stories have words, images paired with words, things can hit harder. It hits more emotionally. It's a little more visceral. And also it's easier to spread images and have them go viral on social media than like a screen cap of like a paragraph of written text. So I think it's because it's a comic. I think it's because of the title. If you are searching like queer book or book about gender, this one's going to come up pretty near the top of the results list because I named it exactly. What it says on the tin is what is inside the can. It's exactly what you get. And then I also think it's because it won a couple of ALA awards, which means that librarians tend to buy all the books that win the ALA awards. So if a parent who was more conservative and didn't might object to this type of book saw news of a challenge in one area and then said, oh, is that book also in my public library or in my high school library? It would be, because the librarians had supported it. So it's kind of like it was widespread enough that the challenges would find it wherever they looked for it. And we know that there's groups like this group very ironically titled Moms for Liberty that are literally like organizing on Facebook, et cetera, to like do these copycat challenges in every single school district. And it'll be like, oh, in my district, we managed to get these 3 books removed. See if you can get them removed in your district. And it's very, again, they're not reading the books. And they're just pulling them.
And the fact that it's a really good point that comics have a sort of double standard to them because of the visual nature. And there's a slippery slope of, your book is clearly not pornography because it's not designed to titillate, but it has a naked body in it, for example. And this idea that if you display a naked body, it is ipso facto pornography is so infuriating, especially to those of us who make pornography.
It's a whole separate craft. It takes a lot of skill. It's actually really hard to draw things and make them look sexy.
It is. So
it's easier to make them not sexy, I think.
So tell us a little bit about what happens next then. The Comic Book Legal Defense Fund did, in fact, help you.
So the kind of rough timeline is, it's like September of last year, I hear about one ban. Between September and October, it is then challenged in like 15 more states. Things sort of quieted down over the winter break, and I was like, maybe that's it. And then there was like another slew of bans in like January and February, which is also when Moz was like removed in that one district in Tennessee, which bumped it back up onto the New York Times bestseller list, which then sort of like started another round of it through the media. And then there were like, then sort of like a trickle of further bans, but also just like really weird media incidents through like February through March of this year. And then in May, a person who was running for a Republican congressional candidate in the state of Virginia sued a Barnes & Noble location in Virginia Beach for carrying genderqueer and another book, a het fairy tale romance novel by Sarah J. Maas, the second book of the Court of Thorns and Roses series, not the first book or the last book, but the second of a series of 8, and claimed that they were obscene and should not be basically available to minors. I think maybe they wanted the books to be like kept behind the counter and you'd have to like show ID as if you were like buying an adult magazine, maybe, but like it was very unclear what they actually wanted from this, because also, this person who brought the lawsuit was running a distant third in his campaign, was running like $90,000 behind the lead congressional candidates, and was projected to lose his election. And he also pushed to have the first hearing of the lawsuit in the first week of the month of June. The primary was on June 21st, and a judge took one look at it and pushed the hearing to June 26th. So it's like, we will put this after the primary.
And thank you for Pride Month, too. That's
really
and
it's
lovely.
Pride Month. And So he did lose his election, as predicted. That's nice. But the lawsuit continued, and it got like pushed and pushed again. What I learned is that the legal process is very slow. But yes, almost immediately, the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund stepped in to sort of represent genderqueer. Again, I was not being sued. It was a Barnes & Noble that was being sued, but like my book was sort of like evidence in the case. And Barnes & Noble lawyered up because they were like, we are a place of business and we cannot be defending every book we sell book by book. That is just not viable for our business model. So they were like, hired the absolute best lawyers you possibly can. And the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund represented my book, and then the publisher of the other novel represented that book. And I had many meetings with lawyers and reviewed drafts of statements. I was very grateful that I at no point had to like appear in court. And that kind of dragged on all the way. It got pushed to July, it got pushed to August, it got pushed to the end of August. The hearing ended up being on August 30th. And a judge heard the opening statements, took a brief recess, and actually dismissed the case before my lawyers even had a chance to speak. So specifically, the judge decided not to rule on the situation of whether the books were or were not obscene. What she actually ruled on is that there were due process issues in the case, and she ruled that the very antiquated law that they were trying to use to declare the books obscene, which was from the 1970s and had not been used in over 50 years, was actually unconstitutional. So the law was actually changed, and I'm very that makes me hopeful that this law will not then be able to be used in any further copycat lawsuits. Yeah. And that was part of why the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund stepped in, is because, I mean, their little whole mission statement is to defend cartoonists who are facing legal troubles, but they were like, we want to make sure the people who are banning books don't think that suing authors and bookstores directly is like a viable route. So we need to like nip this in the bud.
Yeah, that would have been disastrous if that had gone through.
Especially because if it had worked, then they would be like, well, now we're going to sue. Now we're going to sue Mari. Now we're going to sue Alison Bechtel. Now we're going to sue whoever. They would have just probably made a list, and they would have gone down it and just sued everyone, right? So, and one of the other things they told me is that unfortunately, many lawsuits are just a war of attrition. It's just whoever can keep affording to pay their legal fees wins the case. And if you run out of money and you can't pay your lawyer, then you don't have anyone to represent you, and then the case will maybe go to the other side.
America.
Okay.
So I want to talk a little bit about, actually we're flipping through some of your fantasy work, but I'll talk a little bit about how you got to this book in the first place, right? So a lot of the genderqueer material started out as zine material, right? So tell us about how this began.
Yeah. So anyone who came to my talk last night heard the fun anecdote about how I had my first memoir writing experience in a class with Mari in 2013, and I was very resistant to this assignment. But 3 years down the line, I'm graduated from grad school. I have more experience in comics. I'm starting to show at, go to Comic-Con and other conventions. And also was starting to decided I want to come out as non-binary to my community, specifically my like extended family and like comics professional community. And I was having such a hard time like getting it across in conversations, even knowing like, when do I even say like, hey, I use different pronouns now. How do I interject that into a conversation? And feeling like whenever I sat down to talk with people about it, I could never say everything I was trying to say. And so I was like, I think I need to write about this. I think I need to sit down and take the time in comics, which feels like the media that I feel most eloquent and most versed in, to like really figure out what I'm trying to say in like the shortest, most condensed, clear, short form. And so I drew all these little tiny black and white memoir comics. I was definitely referencing the style of James Kochalka's American Elf series, drawing like a little square comic every day with a little title over it. And
no cross-hatching at all.
No cross-hatching at all. Look at that. We've moved on. Artistic development. Anyway, and so when I sat down to start drawing these, I went from me thinking like, how do I say this? And then I drew 60 of these little strips in 2 weeks. And I was like, wow. I have like a lot to say actually. And part of it was also, I did not try to write them chronologically whatsoever. I just sat down, and any thought that I'd had that seemed related to gender, or any memory or interaction that felt gendered, I just wrote down as they sort of came to me, very stream of consciousness. And I wrote a whole bunch of them. And then I was like, oh my God, I have a lot to say. and also these are so personal. Can I ever share this work? Oh my God. And first I like sent it to like my sibling and my best friend, and like I was like, are they good? And then when I got like a positive feedback and love and support, then I shared it with like a slightly wider group of people, like some of my grad school cohort, and they sent me back like love and feedback and support. And then every time I sort of shared it, and then I sent it, like emailed the comics to my extended family to be like, hey, I'm coming out, here's some comics, read them. And then that same year, which was 2016, I challenged myself to post one every day on Instagram during Inktober. And it was kind of like, I used the format of Inktober to be like, okay, you have to post one every day. And if I got to one that I was like, oh God, this one is so personal. No, I mentioned masturbation. This is awful. Why did I write this? I would post it at like 3 a.m, being like, maybe no one will see it if I post it in the middle of the night, which is not how the internet works. But anyway, but yeah, so that was sort of like, I was like, this is how I will come out to my friends and comics peers.
I imagine this is, I mean, are some of you here make memoir comics as well?
Hopefully everyone.
And this is, I mean, it's tough, right? This is a huge, like, I'm sort of getting chills even like thinking about it. Even for people who have been doing it for a long time, it should be difficult. Actually, if it's going to be good, it should be difficult.
Yeah.
So then moving from this sort of level of what you're doing and sort of, producing this kind of work, then you have to take this raw material and turn it into a book. So how did you do this? Basically, you can see the sort of scene here.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. I literally traced it in Photoshop. So yeah, I drew the little black and white strips for about a year, and I think I had over 100 of them when I was like, oh, I think this might be enough content for a book, maybe. I really was not thinking book in the beginning. I was thinking this is a tool to come out. And then I was like, oh, perhaps a book. And here is one of the advantages of going to grad school is networking. One of my good friends, Samuel Satin, had signed a book deal with a company at that time called Lionforge before I had. And he said, I think my editor would be really interested in your work. And that editor was Andrea Colvin, who's now at Little Brown Young Readers. She's wonderful. And he said, can I send her your stuff? And I was like, please do. And he apparently sent her all of the little black and white comics, and she apparently opened it and thought, I'll just read 1 or 2, and then just sat there and read all of them in like an hour and wrote back to Sam like, yeah, this stuff's good, like connect us. And then Sam was like, oh, you're going to Comic-Con this year. Andrew's going to be there. Go up after her panel, introduce yourself, et cetera, et cetera. So I went up like very nervously after a Comic-Con panel. I was like, hi, I'm Sam's friend. And she immediately gave me her business card and was like, let's work on this. And so she was such a mentor to me. She helped me through the whole pitching process. I initially pitched to the company just like a collection of all the little black and white comics, and I was thinking like a little square, like 4x4 inch cute tiny book. And they actually rejected that book pitch and said, would you instead redraw this material, the format of a full-size comics page in color, digital, and turn it into a more flowing narrative instead of like a bunch of vignettes and like short strips. And I said yes, because I had never received a book offer before, and I was very keen, even though I genuinely had no idea if I could do it, but I was like, I'm not going to say no. And then, I had to do the process of like turning what had been a bunch of little tiny strips into like a book. One of the things I did was I printed all of them out and I laid them out on the floor and in chronological order for the first time, and to see which parts of my life I had written about a lot and which parts I had really not touched on. And what I realized is I had written a lot about the most recent 5 years, like grad school to the present moment, and very little about my childhood. So I had to write a ton of new material about like specifically like the first 15 years of my life.
Yeah. Oops. Yeah. So I mean, you also are. This gives you an excuse to then really play with the comics format, right?
Yes.
Where you're using entire pages and you're doing page compositions that are interesting and sort of. I mean, this sort of here with the lower left here, where you're doing a sort of allegorical drawings and stuff like that. So expanding out the imagination sort of around this book. How was that?
Yeah, it really helped that I had been traveling a lot those summers, and I had been carrying these sketchbooks that were roughly like this size, and this brand I really like. I actually think they might have gone out of business, but they're called Nature Sketch. They have like a really hefty watercolor. I'd been doing a bunch of sketchbook pages and like drawing like during a panel, like drawing people while they're talking. And when I was trying to go from like the squares to a page, I realized like I practiced drawing pages like in a sketchbook. And at some point I realized I could just make pages that looked like sketchbook pages.
Yeah.
And that was like, that really kind of unlocked something when I was like, okay, some pages are panels and comics, but then if you skip to the next slide that I think is up there, like this is a page that like is the kind of thing I would just draw in my sketchbook where I'm thinking through like, I'm having like one thought and I'm like just drawing an image, and it is almost more like an illustration paired with like a little piece of text. And when I realized I could like weave those through, that helped. That was like a very like useful piece into the puzzle of turning strips into a book.
But then also with the book, you have to think about pacing, right?
Yeah.
So having these sort of moments where you pull back and you've got a full page spread, or these kind of really impressive illustrations that sort of stop the reader in their tracks. You had to sort of think in terms of pacing, right? So
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot. There were a lot of drafts. There was a lot of laying pages. Again, a lot of laying pages out on the floor and looking at them and then moving them around and actually switching the order of scenes and things like that. Like there were a couple of things. It was interesting, the talk this morning with Ronald Wembley and James Spooner, them talking about like the rules that you make up sort of while you're writing. And one of my rules is that every scene ended at the bottom of a page. No scene ended mid-page. And also I did not count on any double page spreads because I kept pulling pages in and out and the order kept changing, and I was like, I cannot have a scene end mid-page because I might have to move it earlier or later in the book. And I don't know what my double page spreads are going to be until like very late in the process. So every single sort of anecdote ends at the bottom of a page, and the new anecdote starts at the top of the next page.
I also want to bring in something that you mentioned before last night about how comics as an illustrative medium that you and it's especially powerful for queer narratives where you can draw yourself as you perhaps see yourself in the world, as others see you. You can sort of play with that. It's really malleable and plastic. So, something like this, for example, where you're, creating it's a self-portrait, but it is sort of a mythological version. Like how. But I also feel like, I know some creators who have like drawn themselves as literally cartoon rabbits. And Rick Worley, for example.
Yes.
But you also kind of go for a certain amount of realism. I mean, you look at photographic evidence of your own life. So how do you square this stuff? How do you sort of think about portraying yourself visually?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just was influenced by a lot of people. Like in the little square version, it was also like, this is going to be read on Instagram, so people are going to be seeing it like 2 by 2 inches. So we have to simplify. It has to be readable, very, very small. And then when I was expanding it out, I was just thinking about some of my favorite memoir authors and illustrators. I mean, Alison Bechdel is huge. It's probably one of the biggest artistic influences on me. And then also Erica Moen, who does Oh Joy Sex Toy, is another person that I read a lot and has a very cute sort of simple style. And then Lucy Nisley of like all her books. Oh my gosh, I've read all her books. And I think if you look at Lucy Nisley's work and mine, you can see even like the color palette is very similar. And so I was just thinking like, okay, how do you like make people a little bit like smaller and rounder and shorter so that you can fit more of them in a page, basically. It's even going back to like the reason why most like comic strip characters like Charlie Brown and Calvin and Hobbes are usually 2 heads tall so that you can fit the whole character, their head, their entire body language in a panel and still have space for a speech bubble above them. So it is also like, I'm not drawing quite in a strip, but if you scoot to a page that has more panels, like maybe going anyway, whatever. Okay. You'll like it's useful. Like I think this one is like drawing everyone a little bit like just like a little bit squished. Again, just so that you can fit like 3 tiers of panels in a page and have at least half body in each one, as well as like some body language with arms and shoulders, and then also space for a speech bubble. So
you're also, I mean, I think of the structure of this book like Allison, I think sort of broke open the idea of a graphic novel being sort of a graphic essay, right? Sort of essay format, right? And this does seem to me sort of a creative nonfiction essay about your own life and your journey with gender and sexuality. But you also have scenes, right?
Yes.
So how do you sort of fit scenes in with the essay?
I mean, part of it was like, I felt like when I was back to the conversations of trying to come out with people verbally, they would be like, yes, but like, what does gender mean? Or like, why pronouns? And I felt like it wasn't very useful. And also I hadn't like read a lot of like gender theory books. I had at that point not read any Allison, like a Judith Butler or anything like that. And I was like, well, the only thing I can give you is this like memory, this example, this experience that I lived through and how that like felt emotionally. And like, this is my evidence is my lived experience. And so in many ways, I was like, I'm not going to try to big picture explain anything. I'm just going to present to you the evidence of my life and hope that when all of these pieces are read together, it makes a narrative that feels larger and feels more cohesive, when the way that it was lived felt like a little piece, a little piece, a little piece, a little piece. But there were also then thematic things that I tried to do. Like I open with the scene of being a student in a classroom and this exercise. And then one of the very last scenes of the book is when I am teaching and I am giving students a comics exercise. So there were a lot of things that I tried to like bracketing it with like classroom scenes kind of on either end of the book. There's also like 2 scenes of pap smears that are also kind of near the beginning and near the end of the book. Like these kind of thematic callbacks of like a threads that feel like they weave it through and then kind of tie it more nicely together.
Yeah. So I should say a content warning. Sorry.
Yeah,
Just,
throw it up and then
before,
warn afterwards.
But this is one of the most profound sort of visceral moments in the book, and it's sort of takes your breath away. I know this was not an easy page to do.
Yeah.
You do a lot of amazing things with lettering here. Talk to us about the process of creating this page.
Yeah, I mean, this was hard. The 2 pap smear exam scenes were the least enjoyable scenes to write and draw and remember. And the only time that I think when I was at this, like sitting working at my drawing table was like, I'm so frustrated by this. I might cry because it's just, it's frustrating to remember this. It's frustrating to remember how powerless I felt. It's frustrating just anything that has to do with interacting with the healthcare system as a person who is like AFAB and then like trans and non-binary, and trying to explain to people like the experience of living in your body and the type of care that you need and all of this it's a wretchedly frustrating experience all around. And then trying to like capture that feeling of like pain and frustration and like all of that like in a still drawing. I think part of why this page is so blank is because I was like, it's either gonna be words or it's just gonna be like angry lines, because I don't even know how to visualize this like in a more concrete image.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you talked about last night, and Mari was using this as well, where, and even Trung, where there's moments when sometimes the images drop away entirely, and I mean, the brilliance about comics, of course, is this interaction between text and image, and you can play with both. You have both of these tool sets to work with. It's incredibly powerful. I mean, this really took my breath away.
I appreciate you. My mom also said I hate looking at this page, and I was like, well, that's kind of the point.
That's the point,
yeah.
right? I mean, we need to at times create visuals that are both sort of
kind of upsetting,
upsetting and disquieting.
Yeah.
But that's the point of the art.
It is.
On the other side of the spectrum, this is like such a lovely image, and this is an image that starts out. There is a page in the book, and then you've turned it into an art piece.
Yes.
So, explain this sort of process of moving past the book and like you're sort of creating images.
So this page is it's one of my favorites in the book, and it's also one that many people tell me is one of their favorites, and it's just this like metaphor that came to me, and it's actually even in the earlier black and white Instagram-y version of this too. There's like an earlier version. I just was like, how do I explain this gender stuff? And like I just kept coming back to metaphors from nature, and I think it's partly I grew up way out in nature. I grew up on a piece of property that was like 100 acres in the Northern California woods that had no electricity and was like powered by like hydroelectric and solar panels. And we had an outhouse because we didn't have any flush toilets. I grew up in the woods. So I think it's very natural that I turn to metaphors from nature when I'm trying to explain things in sort of a more metaphorical or poetic way. And so this was just like one way that I thought to talk about gender is like, and it went from, like early on, I think it's like I thought of gender as like 2 points, and then I thought of it as a line stretched between 2 points, and then that kind of unfolded into 3D, into like almost like a map. And then I was like, oh, it's like it's like a territory that you can travel around in, and it's like there's ups and downs and lefts and rights, like you can move across like a range of space. And I just sort of wrote this out, and then so many people actually asked me, would you ever turn that page into a poster? And I was like, maybe. So this is the page from the book on this side. And then halfway through this year, Oni was like, we'd really like to make like an exclusive poster to release with a hardcover edition of the book, and also donate like 10% of the proceeds to a charity of your choice. And so I was like, well, I know exactly which page I'm doing because it's the one everyone has been requesting for 3 years. So I redrew the text of this as a poster, and we did it as like a nice like limited edition print on this like lovely archival paper. And then some of the proceeds went to the Trans Lifeline.
Yeah. One of the things it also does is it sort of pulls back even more, where it could really, in the poster version, could be about anything. Like it could be about gender journey, but any sort of identity journey, or so it sort of broadens the scope of the meaning.
Yes.
Yeah, which is lovely.
Thank you.
Okay, so here's some stuff you've been doing since then.
Yes.
And your comic skills keep on getting better and better. It's just like breathtaking. I love this sort of the deconstruction of the panels behind you. You're sort of playing with page layouts. How do you feel like your sort of formal experimentalism is getting more pronounced at this point?
It's somewhat. I think so. And it's just, comics are so fun too. Like, they're just such a delight, and it's really fun to think about, like, how am I going to present this amount of information on a page visually? And so this was a piece that was done for a collection called The Baileys, which was like a queer and POC comic anthology that was organized by another CCA alum, Lawrence Lindahl. And I knew that I only had one page, but I could do literally whatever I wanted with it. And the time that the pitch or the magazine was due was when I was early on in the process of trying to find a therapist and trying to get my health insurance sorted out and work towards top surgery. And so this was just all the stuff that was on my mind. And I was like, how do I fit this onto a page? And again, the the image in the center is like the emotional impulse that is driving all of this super annoying phone calls about health insurance and Kaiser and paperwork and being approved for things and all of that stuff in the background. So I knew I wanted all that to be in black and white and a little bit more I don't know, you can see the bureaucracy and the paper and the calendar pages and all of that. And they're but it's being driven by this emotional fire in the center of it all.
And it's a very comics thing to do. And I think that you really lean into what comic specific sort of language you can do. This is another comic you did about the same sort of experience, but it's very poetic. One of the things Audre Lorde, the author Audre Lorde and Maxine Hong Kingston talk about the idea of automythography, right? Where it's autobiography mixed with this idea of sort of making myth out of your own life instead of factual representation. I'm wondering how you relate to that concept, because this seems to me like the definition of automythography.
Well, first of all, that's very flattering because I love Audre Lorde. But yeah, we also talked about this in our panel last night, where memory is imperfect, and also sometimes telling something the exact way that it happened doesn't express the truth of it as well. And then James Spooner also talked about that in the panel this morning of needing to make one character from real life into two characters in the narrative so that the emotional truth of it is better told. And so this is from a very short piece called Gifts. I do have a couple copies of this in print on my table upstairs. And what I was wrestling with in this piece was how to express wanting to reject pieces of femininity that were kind of given to me, I guess, by being assigned female at birth, but wanting to reject them in an extremely respectful and loving way, and saying I'm not throwing this away because it's trash. It is actually something that's really beautiful and powerful and important. It's just not for me. And so it's setting down this femininity, but in the most reverent way possible. This is a precious gift that does not fit me or suit me. So I was this feeling of I wish I could re-gift it. I wish I could give it to someone who would need it, who would want it, who would use it, or return it to the earth. Yeah,
thank you. Here's some more formal, more recent work as well. And again, you were experimenting with comics formalism. But by the way, folks should think of questions you might want for Maia. We'll in about 5 minutes, we'll be opening up for questions.
Start brainstorming.
Talk to us about what you want to do sort of next in comics, and how, I know you want to return to some fictional work as well. How has the experience of doing this memoir work now shaped what you want to do moving forward?
Well, I definitely want to do both memoir and fiction, both going forward. I love them both so much. This specific page is from a short comic called The Final Project, which was for an anthology from Iron Circus Comics called Faster Than Light. And the story is about two queer high school seniors who are both working on a big science project. One of them is building a faster than light speed engine, and the other one is genetically modifying adzuki beans to try to make them to be able to produce more protein to feed a growing population on a planet facing climate catastrophe. What's that
Sounds
based on?
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, this is probably my favorite page from the story, where I wanted to express that they're working in the same studio for like weeks and weeks at a time, and they just have this ongoing rambling conversation about their projects and about society and about, those kind of conversations you have, I think, at any age, but especially as like teenagers, where you're like, is the conversation just like ranges over every topic, and you're talking about everything and you're talking about nothing. And at the end of it, you feel like so close with this person. And it's again that like working side by side. So it's like each panel was supposed to like express like the week of a semester, but also showing that like they're just having this ongoing conversation for like the entire time.
Yeah, I mean, it's, and again, comic specific, right? Because of the allegorical nature of how comics handles time, it allows for this plasticity where you can have these sort of multiple time frames laid on top of each other, and you're leaning into that, which is really cool.
This comic is 20 pages. This was the longest thing I had ever published before Genderqueer. So I went from 20 pages to 240.
All right, let's see here. So you've also, this is from 3 panels from a collaboration you did with Rachel Pollack and Theater of Terror, Revenge of the Queers, which I edited, and Rachel was my writing mentor, which is like the sort of, I mean, it's this sort of beautiful thing.
The generations of queerness.
I know,
yes.
It's really, that was really special. But these panels are so magnificent because it's sort of moment of awakening and of the character looking down upon her body that's been transformed.
Yeah.
And I was wondering about you have collaborated with other creators before.
A few times, yeah.
Yeah. So talk to us about how the collaborative process works for you. And I imagine like this was probably your contribution to this, right? Because you were deliberately slowing the pacing, doing the visual storytelling. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when I've collaborated, I've always been the artist. I've actually, I so far have never, have I? I don't think I've ever contributed a script that was drawn by someone else. At least if I have, I can't think of it at the moment. But this was a script that I got from Rachel Pollack, who's been writing comics for decades and decades. And she's so experienced. And my memory is that the script was quite good. I didn't have to like make a lot of changes, where on other times I have worked with writers who are much newer to comics, and you get it and you're like, there's no way all of this could fit on one page. What are you doing? And then I have to like honestly basically rewrite the entire script to actually make it workable as comics pages. But that was not the case with Rachel. And yeah, this is a short story that's set in 1920s in France about a trans woman who hears about like a potential like almost like magic ritual to transform your body, but it's very painful and scary. It is for a horror anthology. So this is like a moment of waking up after like a brutal attack by a wild animal that is also like part of this transformation ritual. It was like wonderful to work with Rachel. It was an absolute delight. It's a beautiful, weird, spooky story that I would never have written on my own. And I then got to like spend a lot of time like Googling. She even provided me like with historical reference of this specific French like lesbian club, the monocle that I like she wanted me to reference, and like fashion and like there was isn't it Marlene Dietrich who's like a character in the story, it was good. And this is also one that I did traditionally and with watercolor.
Well, I wanted to talk about like it's the whole. I mean, the watercolor is gorgeous. This must be much more time consuming.
Yes, which is why I now work almost exclusively digitally, even though I love working traditionally and I really miss it. But like basically since Genderqueer, I've really switched to mostly digital, and it's just because it's faster. Yeah.
Are you using tablet like a
just like a Wacom tablet and then Photoshop on my laptop.
Okay. Yeah. And that's for the line work and for the color and for lettering?
Yes. Yeah. So far. Although my next book, I am definitely going to have someone else letter. I'm not going to be hand lettering another book. It took a lot of time, and of course, because I'm writing it by hand, it's riddled with spelling errors because I am very dyslexic and I'm terrible at spelling. And then also, this book has now been translated into multiple languages, and every time it's like, this would have been so much easier if it was typeset so we could translate it more easily. So that was a learning experience as well.
Do a font created out of your own
Yes,
handwriting?
the French edition, they actually they had me create a font, and then they very kindly gave it to me and my publisher. So we've just been giving the font that they made to like other people.
With all the accent aigu?
Yes, I did all of this French specific characters. Yeah.
So I'd like to open it up to some questions from the audience as well. So please let me know if anyone has a question here for Maia. Yes.
I don't have a release date yet for my next book, but I am in literally the middle of the negotiations of the sale. So I also don't feel like I can give you super, super concrete information. Other than that, I have a full script written. I have thumbnailed it. It is currently 215 pages. It will probably grow a little bit in the process. I wrote it with a co-author, another non-binary cartoonist, a friend of mine, Lucky Srikumar. The working title is Sachi's Stories, but that also might change. It is a story about a kid who is 11 at the start of the book and then turns 12. It's in that junior high, puberty, sex ed, peer pressure. Your friends are starting to date. You're questioning your gender and you don't know what's going on. It wrestles with a lot of the same themes as genderqueer, but it is fictional and it's for younger readers. And a lot of the impulse behind it was how many parents, when I was first touring with genderqueer, asked me if I would release an all-ages version of this book because they were like, as a parent, this was super, super useful, but my gender non-conforming child is like 10 or like 8 or like 6, a little young for this. And I was like, I don't want to abridge my memoir. That feels weird. Don't want to do that. But I can write a new book to hopefully meet the need that I think this question is coming from.
It's really fascinating, the idea of sort of looking for, like, thinking about your audience and your market. Like, not every book can be for everybody. No, it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So that's how you have to tailor your creative process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
The only big fictional thing I'm working on right now is book 2. The other big comics project I'm working on is also nonfiction. I'm working with a researcher from a university who did a qualitative study on the mental and physical health effects of top surgery for trans and non-binary folks, and literally conducted hundreds of interviews, had people fill out surveys, all of this, and then took all of this data from like 90 research participants and like turned it into like a document that was like 30 pages long. And then it was like, could you turn this into a zine? Because and I think this is a really smart, like the researcher, her impulse was like, people don't read research papers, and specifically like trans and non-binary populations who would need and could use this information are probably not going to maybe read a research paper, but maybe they would read a zine. And I was like, I love this energy. This is great. And so I'm actually being paid by a grant to turn this 30-page prose document into a comic script. And it has been a lot of work and it's many drafts. And like every time I turn in a draft, it has to be read by like research participants and professors and physical therapists and like all of these people. But I think it's really important, and I also think we can make something really nice out of it. So we've gone through script edits. I have thumbnailed a draft that is 32 pages. I have notes. I think it's going to expand. We're going to expand it up to 36, I think. And then I will draw it, and then I'm going to be talking to James about the process of distributing a nonfiction healthcare-related comic, because I went to his panel where he talked about like health and wealth and all of the democracy, all of those comics, and I was like, oh, you've already figured out the distribution model, and I need to can I just piggyback on that, please? Because we also really wanted to distribute it either very low cost or for free. And we're like, I know how to draw a comic, but I'm less good at distributing it for free nationally.
But there are grants. I mean, that's the other thing. It's sort of an exciting moment for cartoonists in general, I think, because there are grants and foundations and stuff willing to work with us in a way that hasn't been true until very recently.
Yeah, that's true.
So, other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. My sibling is literally my favorite person in the entire world, so I'm happy to talk about them. And also, so Phoebe did indeed color this entire book, and we are very close. We're like 2 years apart in age, and we shared a bedroom until we both moved out for college. And Phoebe also came out as non-binary, like 1 month before this book was published, and so uses they/them pronouns now, which is a thing that I love getting to bring up in interviews because it's like, identity is malleable, pronouns change. So of course we used she, her pronouns for Phoebe in the book, but they use they/them pronouns now. I mean, we're just super, super close. And like I mentioned in the book, like I feel so lucky that I just got a sibling that we just really relate to each other so much, and we love each other so much, and we read all the same books, and we read all the same music, we go to the same concerts, and I adore them, and I adore their partner, and I like anytime they make a new friend, I'm like, tell me about your new friend. I'm gonna follow them on social media, and like, I'm just like, tell me about your life, and like,
stalkerish.
I mean, they do the same to me too. They're like, how is everything? I mean, like, we have these like long phone calls. They do live in Los Angeles, which is like an 8-hour drive from where I live, so we only get to see each other, well, maybe like every other month to like, not constantly. And I love and adore them, and so. When I was first pitching the book, like the early work you saw was mostly done pen and ink and paper. And I, at the time, didn't feel confident enough in my digital art skills to color the book. And I just thought it would take me so long. But I also knew that I couldn't do it in watercolor, which is the media I was like most comfortable with at the time, because that would also take too long. So I asked the publisher, I was like, someone needs to. I need someone else to color this. Could it be my sibling? And they were like, well, submit some tests and some sample pages, and we'll see. And so Phoebe submitted some sample pages, and they liked them enough. They're like, yes, okay, Phoebe can be the colorist of this book. And I also knew that would be so helpful, because obviously the story of my childhood is also the story of their childhood, and so it's just saved a lot of time, because I think if I'd been working with a colorist who didn't know me growing up, I would have had to send them like reference photos and been like, this is the color of my childhood bedroom, and like this is what my aunt looks like, and all of these things that I didn't have to do with Phoebe, because they were there. They knew already. So like, and I even things to like this is the quality of the light of this setting, because this is very warm and this is the place that we loved. Like Phoebe would just know that, because they were also there. And there's all these things I just didn't have to explain, which is really great. So I think they were able to make the colors feel really personal and really integrated with the art. And then also they did a little lightly fact check me on some things. They were like, that's not how I remember that. And, that kind of thing. And then also it was so wonderful is the first week that I was finishing inks and Phoebe was going to start on the colors, they drove out from Los Angeles and then stayed at the house I live with my parents. And we sat next to each other in a desk about this big. And I was sitting here inking and they sat over here coloring. And literally Phoebe would like turn the screen to me like, how does this look? And I'd be like, great. And then they'd be like, and they turn to me, how about this? I'm like, I love it. And they'd be like, how about this one? And I'm like, you're amazing. And they're like, do you have like any feedback? And I was like, no, it's wonderful. They were like, okay, but like constructive criticism, maybe like, should it be greener? Like, I was like, you're awesome. And like, literally I was like, no notes. So pretty much it's just like whatever they did, I was like, it's perfect. So like,
we all need a Phoebe.
Yeah. So yeah, I feel like unbelievably lucky to have a sibling that I love so much, and then like such an amazing collaborative experience. And then Phoebe also like did the colors of the cover, and it's like, I mean, like this cover, like just as line art, was like nice, but with color, it's like everything, And then after the book was done, I literally taught myself how to digital color by just opening up page files of the book and just taking the colors off the pages they'd done and trying to like copy it as close as possible. So literally the digital color style I have now is just like pretending to be Phoebe. It's great. Yeah.
I think there was a question in the back there.
I don't think, so the question is about like whether I was able to have any kind of like pride in the book being banned, or the sort of more, the platform that it gave me and the ability to talk about stuff. Yeah, I mean, what I will say is when a book is banned, when my book was banned, it put me in really good company, and like it put me on banned book lists, which are full of some of my very favorite books and my very favorite authors. And so in that sense, like there's a tiny bit of like feeling like a sense of like honor to be like, I'm now on a list with like Toni Morrison and like all of these books that are amazing and have really pushed culture and changed things, and Moz and all of these other like really impactful books. But it mostly just like, I don't know, it mostly just sucks because of what it says about like where we are at as a society and like a culture. So it's really mixed. It's really mixed, honestly.
Yeah. We're gonna have to end it there. We're running into time,
okay.
So we could talk forever.
We absolutely could. But yeah, I am just about to head upstairs. Yeah. Me and Mari and Trung are all doing a signing at the table that's right next to the bookstore table, so at the end of that aisle upstairs. Yes. So I'll be there for the next hour, and then I will also be at my little table from 3 to 5. So
let's give it up for Maia. Thank you.
And for Justin. Thank you so much for moderating. I love talking to you.